The evening was supposed to be a celebration. After months of planning and excitement, Eric and Sophia were about to embark on the next chapter of their lives. They had planned an intimate wedding, a quiet and personal affair, just as Sophia had always dreamed. However, the dinner the night before would prove to be anything but intimate. Eric, a man in his early 30s with a calm demeanor, had spent the past several years building his life from scratch. He had always been proud of his simple beginnings and the work ethic that had defined him. He worked as a janitor in a local office building, but it was work he respected. His father, Robert, had instilled in him a sense of humility, and he had never been ashamed of his job. To him, it was the backbone of a community that thrived on quiet dedication. Sophia, his fiancée, had grown up in a different world. She was the daughter of James and Linda, two well-established individuals who had built a comfortable life. James, a businessman in the real estate industry, and Linda, a socialite who had always prided herself on maintaining high society connections, had set a different standard for their daughter. They believed in luxury, appearances, and the social ladder. To them, Eric's job as a janitor was simply beneath them. The two families had been planning the wedding for months, and now, the time had come for Eric to finally meet Sophia's parents for the first time in a more intimate setting. It was supposed to be a welcoming dinner, a warm introduction before the wedding, but it felt more like an interrogation. Sophia had been excited about the dinner, eager to show her parents that Eric was a man of substance. She knew how much he had worked to get to where he was and how much he loved her, but she hadn't prepared herself for the tension that would unfold. When Eric arrived at the restaurant, his heart was racing. He had dressed in his best suit, one that he had saved for occasions like this. He hoped that the wealth of love he had for Sophia would be enough to win over her parents. He smiled nervously at Sophia when he walked in, hoping to appear calm and collected. "Eric, this is my father, James, and my mother, Linda," Sophia introduced, smiling nervously as she looked at her parents. "Nice to meet you," Eric said with a firm handshake to both of them, trying to remain calm. He could see the skepticism in their eyes, the way they sized him up as he spoke. The conversation started off politely, with the usual pleasantries about work, family, and the wedding arrangements. But as soon as the question came up about what Eric did for a living, the mood shifted. "So, Eric, what is it exactly that you do for a living?" James asked, his tone polite but laced with curiosity. Eric hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to answer without making things awkward. He had always been proud of his work, but he understood the difference between a janitor and someone like James, who had built a business empire. "I'm a janitor at a local office building," Eric replied, trying to sound confident. There was a brief, uncomfortable silence at the table. Linda exchanged a quick glance with her husband, her face betraying the slight disgust she felt. She tried to mask it with a forced smile, but it was clear that she didn't approve of Eric's occupation. "Is that so?" James finally said, his voice dripping with a subtle judgment. "Well, that's certainly humble." Eric felt a wave of embarrassment wash over him. He had never been ashamed of his job, but in that moment, surrounded by the wealth and comfort of Sophia's family, it felt like the very thing that separated him from her world. Sophia, sensing the shift in the room, tried to change the topic. "Let's talk about the wedding," she suggested, her voice light but faltering. But James wasn't ready to let the matter go. "Tell me, Eric, do you plan on providing for my daughter? I assume a janitor doesn't make much in the way of wealth?" Eric's heart raced, but he kept his composure. "I may not have a fortune, but I've always been able to provide for myself and for the ones I love. And that includes Sophia." Sophia looked down, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She could feel the tension building, and it was clear to her that her parents' expectations of wealth and success were vastly different from what Eric could offer. The dinner continued, but the warmth had vanished. James and Linda seemed intent on digging deeper into Eric's past, each question a reminder of the difference in their social statuses. The evening ended with an awkward goodbye, and Eric could barely keep up the smile on his face. As they drove home, Sophia turned to Eric, a conflicted expression on her face. "I'm sorry," she said softly. I didn't know it would be like that. Eric's heart was heavy, but he tried to reassure her. Don't worry about it. Sophomore, your parents are just protective of you. That's all. But as the drive continued, Eric couldn't help but feel the weight of their judgment. He had always believed in hard work and humility. But in that moment, it felt like everything he had worked for meant nothing to Sophia's family. The days that followed the dinner were filled with silence and tension. Eric had always believed that hard work and love would see him through life's challenges. But the events of that evening had shaken him to his core. He knew that Sophia loved him, but the unspoken rift between their families was growing wider with each passing moment. Sophia had tried to act like nothing had changed, but Eric could see the strain in her eyes. The reality of her parents' disapproval weighed heavily on her. Even though she tried to hide it behind a smile, they spoke less in the days that followed, both busy with preparations for the wedding and dealing with their own inner turmoil. On the morning of the wedding, Eric felt a mix of excitement and unease. He had spent the night before at his modest apartment, tossing and turning in his bed, reflecting on the dinner and the harsh judgments of Sophia's parents. He knew that this day was supposed to be about love and unity, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still left unresolved. Sophia had sent him a text that morning, as she did every day leading up to the wedding. It was a simple message, a reminder of their love. I can't wait to marry you, Eric. No matter what anyone thinks, I know we're right for each other. Her words brought him some comfort, but there was still the weight of her parents' skepticism hanging over him. He didn't want to be just a janitor to them. He wanted them to see that he was worthy of their daughter. More importantly, he wanted to prove to himself that he was enough. The wedding venue was a beautiful, grand estate on the outskirts of the city, far more luxurious than Eric had imagined. It was nothing like the small gathering he and Sophia had originally envisioned. As soon as they arrived, Sophia was swept away by her mother and her bridesmaids to prepare for the ceremony. Eric stood alone for a moment, taking in the grandeur of the venue. It felt like a dream he wasn't sure he belonged in. The sound of laughter and chatter filled the air as guests began to arrive. Sophia's family was there, of course, along with friends and colleagues from both sides. Eric's nerves started to creep in as he realized just how different their lives had become. It wasn't supposed to be like this. This wasn't how he had pictured his wedding day. As he waited for the ceremony to begin, he received a text from Sophia. I'm so nervous but so excited. We'll be okay. I promise. Her words were meant to reassure him, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of doubt. As much as he wanted to be the man she deserved, he felt the weight of Sophia's parents' expectations pressing down on him. They had made it clear that his job and his humble background were a disappointment to them. And no matter how much he loved Sophia, he couldn't help but wonder if it would ever be enough. The ceremony was beautiful, but it was hard for Eric to focus on anything other than the fact that Sophia's parents were still watching him with the same disapproving eyes. When it was time for the vows, Sophia stood beside him, her smile radiant as she gazed at him with all the love in the world. She looked beautiful, more stunning than he could ever have imagined. And for a moment, he allowed himself to believe that this was all worth it. I, Eric, take you, Sophia, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he said, his voice steady but his heart racing. I, Sophia, take you, Eric, to be my lawfully wedded husband, she replied, her voice filled with emotion. The guests cheered, and they sealed their vows with a kiss, the culmination of all the love and challenges they had faced together. But as they walked down the aisle, hand in hand, Sophia's parents remained silent, their eyes cold and judgmental. It stung, but Eric pushed it aside. This was their day, and nothing would spoil it. The reception that followed was grander than he had expected, with elegant decor, exquisite food, and lavish gifts from guests. The sound of clinking glasses and laughter filled the air. But Eric couldn't ignore the uncomfortable tension between him and Sophia's parents. As the evening went on, Sophia pulled him aside for a quiet moment. Are you okay? She asked softly, her hand resting on his arm. I know things have been difficult with my parents, but today is about us. He smiled and kissed her forehead. I'm fine. We're fine. I love you. And that's all that matters. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He wanted to feel accepted, to feel like he truly belonged in this world that Sophia was a part of. He wanted to prove to her parents that he wasn't just a janitor, that he had something to offer beyond his job and background. After a few more hours of socializing, it was time for the gifts to be opened. As expected, most of the gifts were extravagant, expensive items that reflected the wealth of their guests. But then, it was Eric's turn to present his gift to Sophia. He had been thinking about this moment for weeks. Ever since the awkward dinner with Sophia's parents, he knew they had expected something grand, something expensive, but Eric had a different idea in mind. He stepped forward, carrying a large, carefully wrapped package. As he placed it in front of Sophia, the room went silent. Sophia looked at him, confused but intrigued. "Eric, what is this?" she asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Just open it," he said softly, a smile playing on his lips. With a little hesitation, Sophia tore off the wrapping paper, revealing a beautiful, old-fashioned painting of a serene forest landscape. The brushstrokes were soft, the colors rich, and the entire scene was peaceful, almost dreamlike. "I found this," Eric said, his voice steady, "in a small shop not far from here. The owner said it was created by an artist named Henri Delacroix. I thought it was perfect for us, for our future together." Sophia's eyes widened. She looked at the painting and then back at Eric. "It's beautiful. But who's Henri Delacroix?" Eric smiled. "It's a long story, but I thought you'd appreciate it." At that moment, Sophia's parents, who had been watching quietly, stepped forward, their expressions filled with disbelief. "Where did you get this?" James asked, his voice trembling with excitement. This is a piece by Henri Delacroix. His work has been lost for generations. It's worth a fortune." The room fell silent. Sophia looked between her parents and Eric, confused but intrigued. James and Linda, still shocked, turned to Eric, who remained calm. I'm not sure about the details," he said softly, "but my grandfather was a collector. This painting has been passed down through the family." Sophia's parents were speechless. They stared at the painting, their eyes wide with disbelief. "You," James stammered. "You're related to Henri Delacroix?" Eric nodded. "Yes, I guess you could say that." The revelation hit everyone in the room like a thunderclap. Sophia stood frozen, her mind racing. She had no idea. The painting that had seemed so simple was actually worth a fortune. Eric, the humble janitor, was related to one of the greatest artists in history. For the first time that day, James and Linda were silent, their expressions filled with awe and regret. Eric had proven something to them, something they had never expected. His love for Sophia was real, and his family, humble as they were, had a legacy far greater than they could have imagined. And as the evening wore on, Sophia's parents, once so quick to judge, now looked at Eric with newfound respect. And the atmosphere at the wedding finally began to shift. What had started as an evening filled with discomfort and judgment ended with a new understanding. The revelation about the painting by Henri Delacroix left everyone in the room stunned. For a moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with disbelief, and Sophia could hardly process what she had just learned. Eric, the man she had chosen to marry, was related to one of the most famous artists in history. The realization hit her like a freight train. Her parents, who had dismissed him for his humble occupation, were now staring at him with awe and regret. James, Sophia's father, was the first to break the silence. His voice trembled slightly as he stepped closer to Eric. How could we not have known this?" he murmured, his eyes still fixed on the painting. "You've been hiding this all along?" Eric felt a pang of discomfort at the question. "I didn't hide it, but I never thought it was important," he said quietly, his voice calm but filled with emotion. "I didn't want to be judged for who I am or where I come from. What matters is that I love Sophia, and that's all I ever wanted you to see." For the first time that evening, James and Linda were left without words. They had no retort, no way to dismiss the quiet dignity Eric had shown. They had ridiculed him for his job as a janitor, assuming that his worth was tied to his occupation and not the man he truly was. But now, The man they had so eagerly looked down upon had a legacy that far outshone their expectations. Henri Delacroix wasn't just a forgotten name to Eric. It was a part of his bloodline, his heritage. The painting in front of them, a masterpiece by Delacroix, was just one piece of a much larger story, a story that Eric had inherited, quietly and without fanfare. Sophia's gaze shifted between Eric and her parents. She had always known that Eric was different, but this was something entirely unexpected. How could she have not known this about him? How had she missed the quiet pride in his eyes when he spoke about his family, his history? But there was something else she realized too. This revelation, as stunning as it was, didn't change how she felt about Eric. She loved him, not for his bloodline or his inheritance, but for the man he was, for his integrity, for the way he cared for her, and for the humility he wore like a badge of honor. Her heart swelled as she looked at him, seeing him in a new light, but still seeing the same man she had always loved. "Eric," she whispered, taking his hand, "I'm proud of you. I don't care about the painting or your family's history. What I care about is you. I've always cared about you." Her words cut through the tension in the room. They were simple, yet they held so much weight. The guests, who had been watching the exchange with curiosity, were silent now, sensing the profound shift that had just taken place. Sophia's parents, still processing the shock, exchanged glances. They knew they had misjudged Eric, but what could they do to make it right? What could they say to fix the years of disparagement? "Sophia is right," Eric continued, turning to her parents. "The painting, the history, all of it. It's not why I'm here today. I'm here because I love your daughter, and I want to spend the rest of my life with her." Linda was the first to speak after a long pause. Her voice was softer now, laced with a newfound respect. We should have never judged you, Eric," she said, her eyes brimming with sincerity. "We're sorry for how we treated you. You're more than we ever gave you credit for." It wasn't an easy thing for Linda and James to admit, but after hearing Eric's heartfelt words and understanding the depth of his character, they couldn't deny it anymore. They had made mistakes, and they were willing to own up to them. The room was quiet for a moment before Eric spoke again, his voice calm but firm. "Thank you, but I don't need your approval. I only need Sophia's love." It was then that Sophia's parents truly understood. Eric had been strong and unwavering in his devotion to their daughter, never seeking validation from anyone. It wasn't his job, or his family's legacy, that made him who he was. It was his heart. After a moment of silence, James finally nodded, his face softening. "You're right, Eric. We've made our judgments, but it's clear now that they were wrong. We can't change the past, but we can work towards a better future." The tension in the room began to lift, replaced by an unexpected sense of resolution. The past had been written, but now, it was time for something new, a fresh start. Sophia squeezed Eric's hand, grateful for his unwavering strength in the face of adversity. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere shifted. What had started as a day of tension and awkwardness had turned into one of understanding and new beginnings. Sophia and Eric shared their first dance as husband and wife, surrounded by friends and family who now saw Eric in a new light. Later, as the guests mingled and celebrated, Eric felt a sense of peace that he had never experienced before. His heart was full, not because of his family's legacy or the inheritance he had unknowingly received, but because of the woman by his side, the woman who loved him for who he was, not for what he had. As he looked around the room, he realized that the true measure of a man wasn't his wealth or status, but the depth of his heart and the love he gave. And in that moment, Eric knew that he had everything he needed. Sophia and Eric left the wedding that night feeling more united than ever. The revelation about the painting had brought their families together in a way that neither of them had expected. They knew that they still had much to learn about each other's backgrounds and histories, but they also understood that love, trust, and mutual respect were the foundation of their relationship. Eric had been right all along. It wasn't his job, his humble beginnings, or his family's legacy that mattered. It was the love he shared with Sophia, and the life they would build together. And with that, they both stepped into their new life, knowing that no matter what challenges they would face, They would face them together. The greatest gift Eric had given that day was not just the painting, but his unwavering love and integrity, which, in the end, were worth far more than anything money could buy.